Hey, welcome back, everybody. We are having a great time here, and we were joined by Ron Smolin. And that means there's actually four of us sitting here, five with John, and we've been doing our best, and we've been having I think we've been having a good time, and there's plenty to talk about. Well, we've covered Kennedy assassination, which covered somewhat, got into Lincoln and Reagan and the other occurrences like that. And we're still currently doing Pearl Harbor and the effect it had on all of us. Of course, only two of us got any the recollections of that time. John was, what, 2, and you were, how old were you, Ken?
I was just going to be 9. My birthday, December 10th, so 3 days short of 9.
So you
I was in grammar school.
You got a pretty good recollection then. 'Cause I know I was pretty old. Thought I was pretty old when I was 9 myself.
Oh, I wasn't.
And this year is the 70th anniversary. We're in a 1 year, so this is the 70th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Oftentimes, though, we've grown up with something, and we hear it referred to or whatever, and to actually go and see. Now, that's one thing I got on my bucket list was to see Pearl Harbor and the monuments there before I turn up my toes. And I thought one of the best presentations and recordings or recorded piece of work done about World War II was one of the earliest was Victory at Sea.
Yes.
With the music and the film they took and turned into thousands of hours. They turned into such beautiful. How many episodes are there? A dozen or so, or something?
Oh, no.
Oh no, it's
26.
Like a
whole season, probably 26.
Yeah.
Episodes.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know those are available on DVDs now. You can.
I have the
Richard
set.
Rogers.
Richard music. And, and the thing is, it was so recent after the war, and yet it's a very objective look at it. The propaganda part is there, but it's not all. It's not all like we're still at war and everything is. We got to be right, America, right or wrong. Of course, that quote from somebody too was
Stephen Decatur.
Tell me if this is incorrect.
Yeah.
He said, "America, right or wrong. If it's right, keep it right. If it's wrong, make it right."
Two versions. Well, there's two versions. Stephen Decatur said, "Our country, in her relations with foreign governments, may she always be right, but our country, right or wrong." Then Carl Schurz was the one who came up with the version that you said. He said, "Our country, right or wrong, when it's right to be kept right, when it's wrong to be put right."
Okay.
But the original quote was, "Our country, right or wrong."
So one guy got a town named after, and one guy got a high school, huh?
Decatur.
And Carl Schurz?
Carl Schurz.
What was he?
Oh, newspaper man.
Oh.
Newspaper man.
He was a senator. Wasn't he a senator from 2 different states?
That's
From Illinois and Missouri.
That sounds.
How can you do that?
Yeah, that sounds possible.
Once?
Not at the same time. No.
I can't say for sure.
And what was Stephen Decatur? Was
He's a naval officer.
Naval officer,
Naval
right?
officer.
Yeah.
So you kind of figure it's kind of the naval officer is saying my country right or wrong. The newspaper man is saying, well, when it's right, okay, and when it's wrong.
Yeah.
He's a little hedging it more than Decatur did.
Anyone know who Tom Lehrer is? Remember he wrote those satirical songs in the 60s. He was real popular. Anyway, the one he's talking about something about the Senate, and he says, "After all, I'm from New York, and I'm from Massachusetts, and Massachusetts is, after all, the only state with 3 senators." There was the time Bobby Kennedy had run for Senate from New York. Well, Ferdinand goes, "How come he have 3 senators?" Spread over TWA, right over the top of the head. But
just to digress on Carl Schurz, he was eventually up in Wisconsin, so he bounced around a little bit. His wife started kindergarten. She started the very first kindergarten. It's German.
Is that why we have the German? We kept the German name
Yeah,
for
children's
it? Kindergarten.
Children in a garden.
Yeah.
And it was she started kindergarten. Yeah. And
there was an old German saying that the the responsibility of a woman were the 3 Ks: Kinder, Kirche, and Kuche. Children, church and cooking.
Yeah.
Kinder, Kirche, and Kuche.
Kuka.
KKK.
Uh-oh.
Not the same KKK.
Not the same.
No, that's something else altogether. We know. So anyway, where were we? Back with Pearl Harbor, and as we said before, the U.S. had an appearance of being under martial law following that, and even though we weren't.
We had a great, you had a huge civil defense effort because, there was this thought that we might come under attack. We realize now neither the Germans nor the Japanese had any type of weapon system that could strike the United States. The Japanese later had those balloon bombs that they floated across the Pacific, but no real weaponry that could actually touch the United States. But at the beginning of the war, Fiorello LaGuardia was the national commander of the civil defense effort.
Is that right? Yeah.
And they had this huge civil defense effort. I know in my town of Cicero, our auxiliary police unit was created in 1942 as part of the nationwide civil defense effort. And you've seen the movies with Laurel and Hardy as air raid sirens and air raid wardens. And that's when I think the beginning of the idea of air raid sirens in the cities. And they had blackouts in New York, even though the Germans had no planes that could touch New York City.
The gag was always like the air raid warden, put out that light or something.
Right.
And it's even in It's a Wonderful Life. They
Wonderful,
show him as the air raid warden putting the light out or something.
I was just reading a book about Hitler, and I came across in 45 when it's all over with. I mean, the Russians are at the gates of Berlin, and he's still fantasizing about. He's talking about destroying London and destroying Paris with the V2s, and he actually was talking about air raids on Manhattan, and he was just almost ecstatic at the idea of German planes. The destruction that they would cause with these huge buildings in Manhattan. He was fantasizing about launching attacks on New York City.
Well, earlier on, there was a lot of concern, fear, and ignorance, I suppose, about Fifth Column right here at home. And there were some incidents with some German boys, right?
Yeah.
The German saboteurs that were landed on the East Coast.
Executed.
And
some
all
from
around.
Chicago here, too, wasn't it?
One guy was from Chicago, and
he had lived here and then gone back to the
right.
He was a good boy. He obeyed the orders and come back home.
Yeah.
And they were tried by military commissions, just like what we have in Guantanamo. They were tried, convicted, and executed.
Yeah, the same day. The same day. Yeah.
Now,
his parents,
and it was upheld by I think it was challenged and later was upheld by the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
My mother's parents came from Austria before the First World War, very German. Matter of fact, my grandmother and her sister and their husbands came over together around 1905 or 06, I think it was. And they were planning on working for a while and going back. Well, I'm glad they did. 2 world wars and all that.
Yeah, right.
But my oldest aunt, my mother's oldest sister, married a guy who was born there, from the same area. They were in Austria. And to the day, Gus, he sounded German to the day he died. He still had the accent. So he was a citizen of the United States working for the railroad, and he gets a draft notice when Austria was made union, Anschluss.
Anschluss, yeah, in 38.
And,
while the Baron and Julie Andrews were on their honeymoon. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
thank you very much for that.
Sorry. I always think of that because that's one of the while they're on their honeymoon, you see the Nazis marching into Salzburg.
In Salzburg,
The swastikas being unfurled.
He got a draft notice from the United States.
No,
from
the Germans.
And
he took it.
I was going to say, who was drafting?
He took it either down to someone, and they said, well, "Who are you? And you're a citizen." Forget about it. But I suppose they sent out all these sucker letters figuring they're going to get some boys coming back,
they get
too.
Some,
A draft notice from the German army.
Yeah.
Of course, when he was
should have
born,
saved that one.
I hope he did. He lived to his 90s somewhere.
Yeah.
But I thought it was kind of interesting that they would send all that. Of course, we had a German-American Bund that was active.
It was a big deal.
Yeah, ostensibly it was a German culture thing, music and get together. But they had other plans for that, didn't they?
Well, and you got to remember, the United States was an isolationist country. Lindbergh was that America First group. They didn't want to go back into Europe and fight another war. For
what I've always found
Europeans.
most reprehensible about Lindbergh, and I mean he was a great hero in terms of the Spirit of St. Louis. Reading his speeches, he didn't believe we could defeat the Germans. He bought into this notion of the master race and the superior. He actually was fearful. He talked in one of his big speeches about Americans being sent across the ocean and being slaughtered on the battlefields of Europe, as though we couldn't we couldn't defeat the Nazis. And I find that to be one of the things about something that I find to be just turns me off about Charles Lindbergh and his isolationism. It wasn't so much, I don't know how much of it was ideological. It just that he didn't think that Americans could measure up against the Germans.
Yeah. He was into some theory. It wasn't really Nazi, it was a pre-Nazi thing about
racial
the best,
eugenics.
Most intelligent whatever people were from Northern and Western Europe, and that type of thing. Which, of course, that would fit right in with the Nazi business itself. Yeah. I know later on he either volunteered his services in World War II, but was turned down.
FDR absolutely refused.
No.
He wouldn't forgive Lindbergh for what he had
Lucky
said and done before the. Although Lindbergh then, as a civilian, he was hired by one of the airplane manufacturers as a civilian, and he flew combat missions. He got aboard combat missions in the Pacific, and I think shot down at least one Japanese plane.
I think he did
in
too.
The Pacific.
He was flying.
He was at that point he was a patriot.
I think Pearl Harbor
P-38,
changed. P-38.
Yeah.
And also one of the things he did with the P-38s, he was able to.
He was not a traitor. I mean,
no, he's not a traitor. No, he was able to somehow increase their range by having them, like go out on part power, and but I was going to say what happened to Lindbergh. I think around 1936 he was invited by the Germans to tour their war plants.
Right.
And he was accompanied by an aide who was, writing everything down, and they were way ahead of us.
He was impressed with what he saw.
Yeah, and then Goring gave him a medal, which he was not prepared to accept, but he couldn't turn it down, and that was sort of against
tarnished his image.
Tarnished his image. But he saw all these modern planes, and we're still using biplanes, on our aircraft carriers, et cetera, and the pea shooters and all that,
So that information was disseminated to the.
Ultimately, it was. They really opened up their industry. They wanted
to impress Lindbergh with what they had achieved.
Yeah, the ultimate aviator of the world, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what else about him too, which sort of was a little bit phony, was that he eventually settled in Hawaii, and he had children out of wedlock with an Hawaiian gal. And he's buried in Hawaii.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And but he had his family here at home, Ann and Morrow, and they, I don't know how many children they had, but so that was sort of you don't do things like that, at least.
A few years ago, Philip Roth wrote a book, one of these alternate history books, in which Lindbergh is elected president of the United States on an isolationist ticket in 1936. Now, neither Lindbergh nor anybody else could have defeated Franklin Roosevelt. It might have been 40. Might have been the third term. I think it was 40.
That's why FDR was
1940.
It was 1940.
It was 1940.
No one had run for a third term.
But I would say not Lindbergh nor anyone else was going to defeat Franklin Roosevelt, including in 1940. But the premise of the book was that the Lindbergh baby was not murdered. That the Lindbergh baby had been kidnapped by the Nazis and was in Germany. And that they were using this over Lindbergh. That the reason Lindbergh was the isolationist was that they would kill his child if he did not take an isolationist line.
Wow!
And he becomes president, and in effect is in effect being forced little by little to sell the United States out to the Nazis. And finally, it just becomes too great for Lindbergh, and he commits suicide. He takes his own life rather than do what they're ordering him to do. He takes his own life in the spirit of St. Louis. He takes the plane off. He uses it in his campaign. He's campaigning in the spirit of St. and he crashes. And then his Anne Morrow Lindbergh reveals the truth of why this has all happened. And the nation then. It's an interesting book. I don't read much fiction, but it was an interesting book.
Yeah, it's an interesting comment.
Interesting
Yeah,
premise.
it is. Yeah.
Did you ever see a picture called Gabriel over the White House from the 30s?
I've heard about it.
No.
TCM
there are
has
no
it
tapes
sometime.
available. I've tried to get tapes of it. You can't get a tape.
They're turning the U.S. into a totalitarian state to fight gangsters.
Oh.
When it comes down to, and if you see it, check it out.
No, I've
We'll
never even heard of it.
It's a bizarre film.
Yeah,
I've
it
read
is,
about it. It's a bizarre film.
Was it done by Hollywood or?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think
some
it was
stars.
Warner Brothers, which
I think it was MGM, but a Cosmopolitan production, which were ones that were owned by Hearst.
I don't think. But it's the premise is that this president then almost gets like dictatorial powers because of the crime wave in the country, and he's ruling by decree.
Yeah.
And it's a bizarre film. But you can't get tapes of it.
It looks kind of like the federales in Mexico, the way they're operating there. Right into town.
Walter Houston, I think, is the president.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Walter Houston is the president.
Yeah. But he's kind of. Wasn't he kind of a reluctant in that character? Or you see it?
I've never seen it. I just read about the film.
Yeah, but check that one out. Anybody out there in television land or radio land, either one. If you're watching us on television, knock it off. We're not on television.
Yeah, right.
We're not even on radio right now, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
But we're on YouTube.
We're on Cyber. Cyberspace too. YouTube. But anyway, where were we now, folks? Pearl Harbor. Okay, here's another one. We almost touched on it before. A lot of talk in years since then that FDR knew all about this. He knew it was coming. It was done on purpose. It was to galvanize the nation, allow this attack to happen.
I absolutely and unequivocally reject that whole idea. And I've had friends that have argued that point with me. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a patriot. And the idea that he would deliberately allow America's fleet to be attacked, that he would allow all these American servicemen to be killed with his knowledge in advance, even if you believe that Roosevelt was so evil a man that he would do this, which I completely reject, look at the consequences he would have faced if that had ever been discovered. Imagine what would have become of Franklin Roosevelt if the public, the Congress, had learned that he had done such a thing. I think it's just absolutely absurd. For one thing, he loved the Navy. He'd been Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He took a personal interest in the Navy. The Army was always upset that they felt that FDR favored the Navy. And again, the idea that he would allow our fleet to be sacrificed in that way is just totally against the character of Franklin Roosevelt. And the final thing is, those who think Roosevelt wanted to get us into the war, Roosevelt wanted Hitler defeated. He very much thought that Hitler was a potential threat to the United States. He wanted Hitler defeated. Getting us into a war with Japan does not get us into war with Hitler. There was no guarantee after Pearl Harbor that we were going to be fighting the Germans. In fact, it was through Hitler's stupidity and rage and contempt for the United States that 4 days later he goes to his dummy Reichstag and declares war on the United States of America. And if you read the speech, it's almost as if Hitler is declaring war personally on Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Most of the speech is just a denunciation of FDR. It has much more to do with FDR even than it does with America. So the treaty that the Germans had with Japan did not bind them to join a war that Japan started. If we attacked Japan, then the Germans would have been obligated to come to their aid. So, and this was public knowledge. The Germans talked about changing the treaty, but there was absolutely no guarantee that Pearl Harbor was going to result in us going to war with Hitler and the Third Reich. So, forgive me for being a little bit lengthy on this, but I find it to be totally unsustainable. And it's mainly just people who hated Roosevelt, didn't like, and so that they're willing to believe that he's capable of any perfidy, including the idea that he would have been involved in the tragedy of Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. Mr. Little?
Yes.
Do you have anything to say about that?
No, it's very, very fascinating. They knew it was coming, though. It was just a matter of time, I think. And
well, they wouldn't have been doing their homework if they didn't know something was up, right?
Exactly. And with the remember FDR with the oil embargo, and the scrap, embargo, scrap metal, and so they, in fact, they thought it was. They didn't even think that when the announcement was Pearl Harbor, they said no, it's got to be the Philippines. It's not, they didn't think that the Japanese were, and the Japanese were very cagey. They didn't, and we're still in a peace mentality, really,
We were a different country.
We're a different country.
We were people try to project the America of today with the Pentagon and the national defense and everything. America's constantly on guard. We weren't like that in December. Pearl Harbor changed us. It made us the country that we know today.
Everyone loves us.
Yeah, right.
That's it, no.
Yeah, right.
We'll just put down our arms.
Yeah.
They'll put down their arms, and we'll
Yeah.
hug each other and
Yeah.
kumbaya.
All
Yeah.
through 1941, while the Germans are invading Russia and Japan is expanding in the Pacific, what's the big story in the United States? Did DiMaggio get one today?
Sure, exactly.
Baseball. We didn't care about what was going on overseas.
No, etc.
It was news. We knew Hitler was a bad guy, but it didn't seem to directly affect us.
I know we had a lot of covert activity going on in the North Atlantic
Sure.
with the Brits there, and
Sure.
and we transferred 50 overage quote destroyers
Yeah.
to the
And I think
Lend-Lease,
I think they were World War One.
Yeah,
know,
they
the
were
forced
old
actors, as they
ships.
call
They
they
them.
were as good as what we had.
Yeah,
They were.
Well, we what John was saying that FDR always talked about my Navy,
Oh, yes.
Navy.
Yeah, FDR, he wanted Hitler to lose, but he didn't necessarily want the United States to have to do it. He thought at the beginning of the war that we could just supply the British and the French, not knowing the French were going to collapse. He thought we could just supply them with aid and they would do the job of defeating Hitler. He wasn't eager to get the United States in the war. He was eager to see Hitler lose, to see Hitler defeated. He came to realize by 41 that the only way Hitler was going to be defeated was by the United States, that no one else was going to be able to do it.
Yeah, and the emphasis in the early, even after Pearl Harbor, was still on Europe.
Right.
And bolstering the Russia and they were, the Navy was really, we were down to one or two carriers in the whole Pacific, and
Japan had been aggressive since like 1931, going to
exactly,
Manchuria.
China.
They created that puppet state of Manchukuo, they called it.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, we were watching, remember Channel 9 for a while after the movie would run a old movie tone news for a while, maybe 25 years ago now.
Yeah.
Well, this one it was about, they were calling her, this must have been middle 30s or early, she was being called the Joan of Arc of Manchukuo.
Ooh.
This little lady, a warrior lady. I'm thinking to myself, she's a Japanese puppet.
Sure. Yeah.
Manchukuo.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they set up the former emperor, the Henry Puyi, they call him. He had been the last emperor. The movie The Last Emperor was about him. They set him up as a puppet monarch of this Manchukuo.
Yeah.
Manchuria.
Yeah. It was very obvious what was happening there, and but Congress wouldn't appropriate money. You see pictures of soldiers with a wooden machine gun and stuff like
The
that.
mentality was, if we prepare for war, we're going to get into a war. So if we're
into
not
a war.
prepared for war, then we won't get into a war.
There was another movie tone around the same period. It was in 1936. The fascist Italy invaded Ethiopia. It showed former tribesmen. Now they're now in uniform. They're in uniform of Ethiopia. Of Haile Selassie, in uniform now with no shoes, and they're marching off to battle the Italians with wooden pole guns.
Yeah.
They didn't even have weaponry.
Yeah.
But that was
Churchill said that Ethiopia was the only country in Africa that had never been colonized by a European power, because for 1,000 years nobody had considered it to be worth the bother to invade and occupy Ethiopia until Mussolini came along.
And he wanted to make a big show.
Territory.
Yeah.
Put them on the map, huh?
Yeah, put them on the map is right.
I mean, there's so much history in a place like that too. It was Ethiopia, and they invaded Albania at the same time, which is kind of a bizarre country of its own way. I mean, what was there?
There's only six. In the movie, there's only 6 Albanians that vote in the United States. So they have a small
The
small
Belushis,
block.
that's Albanian.
What?
Jim Belushi, that's Albanian.
It's a Muslim country. A lot of people don't
Yeah,
realize
Is it?
Albania
Oh,
is
either
the
Muslim
only
or-
European Muslim.
But
until
Orthodox.
recently, when they've broken up some of the other Balkan
Yeah.
provinces. But in the past, it was the only Muslim majority nation in Europe.
Yeah.
Or the other people are basically Orthodox, I believe. The ones and there's the ones that are unorthodox too. But then also
King Zog. They had a king.
King
named
Zog.
he's
Yeah,
been a
right.
shepherd or something before, I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
And in Somalia, it was British Somaliland and Italian Somaliland became Somalia. So they had a colony over there too in the northeastern corner of Africa.
Well, they had invaded Ethiopia early on, and they'd been beaten around the turn of the century. They had, 1896, they had invaded Ethiopia and had taken a beating. So this was kind of revenge. Mussolini wanted to avenge the defeat that they had suffered, 40 years earlier.
I remember someone in the history class at the City College again, and he was talking about, why would anybody want these countries? And it's all desert. And he says, well, look at this. Your country is orange. You want other orange spots around to show us all this territory is yours or something.
Yeah.
In that order.
And they did. Germany had the colonies all over the place, and Belgium.
Belgium had the little Belgium has this huge Belgian Congo,
Yeah.
many times larger than Belgium.
Which was personal property of the king, supposedly. Yeah, personal property.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, Ron, what do you say about Pearl Harbor and conspiracy?
My history of Pearl Harbor goes with Hogan's Heroes, because I am way, younger than that era. But I will give you one little bit of history that I have from that. My uncle drove the tanks out there. He brought home a complete flag, swastika, German flag. And the mentality of America at the time was you shouldn't have something like that. Of course, Grandma was all worried about it. It's destroyed, except for the round circle and the cross that's in the middle, which we still have.
Yeah.
So with
It's a shame.
Yeah.
We got that part as a frame, and my kids took it to school, and even people were just, to see that part of it.
Yeah.
When you see that, it just still strikes.
So he was in Europe with
He was in Europe, yeah.
with General Patton, or
I don't know who he was with. I just know he was in
doesn't
Germany.
matter whoever.
Yeah. But he sent back home the whole flag. But we only have the circle and the cross in the middle.
Yeah.
And still, when you see that and people see that, they're just like, wow.
Yeah.
Didn't a lot of guys bring home Lugers and things like that too?
Sure.
Oh, sure.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, or 45s too. That
Yeah.
they, Ron, what you're talking about, like reunions over at like the Arizona Memorial, you have American and Japanese who fought each other. Now they're slapping each other on the back,
Oh, sure.
and so they were the little guy on the low end of the totem pole, just like we were.
Everybody
It's incredible how close friends Japan and the United States have become. I mean, we don't think about it. Japan is one of those countries that never really has crossed the United States on anything since the war. You don't think of any big divisions between Japanese leaders and the United States. They've been very maintained a certain loyalty to their alliance with the United States.
And they had virtually no armed forces until recently.
I'm just going to say, and that's
Article 9
They know
of the
they depend
Constitution.
on America for their security.
but you wonder, the Koreas we have a problem today because in '53, when I got drafted, and they didn't really solve that armistice problem, and we still have troops. They're talking about troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. We got troops in Germany.
Sure.
The war ended when?
And in
45,
Korea.
and
I heard
in
some
Korea.
commentary on one of the talk shows yesterday. I think it was Charles Krauthammer said, "What do we got troops in Germany for? They're not in danger of being invaded by anybody.
No.
Just move them somewhere, take them out."
But you know what it does for those economies? They don't have to maintain a huge defense budget like the United States does.
And the GI Joe spends a lot of dough over there.
Yeah, sure, and the United States does too. So I don't know what we're doing with all troops in 102
Well, there's
countries.
a certain mentality that all the smaller nations around Germany, to this day, want some precaution against having to face once again what Germany was in the war. I mean, no one talks about that, but it is true.
Yeah.
They said once, why did they set up NATO? There was a statement, well, why did we set up NATO? They said, well, there were three purposes. To keep the Americans in Europe, to keep the Russians out, and to keep the Germans down.
Yeah.
I know when, how many years ago now is that East Germany was reunited with West? David Letterman said in a monologue, the President of Germany said he was very happy to join with East Germany and Austria and Czechoslovakia.
Right, yeah.
That's just what you're talking about there. So.
Yeah.
You look at all this economic problem. It's Germany that's the decisive country. Germany that's kind of calling the tune. And you already get the sense that there is unease in some of these other countries at having Germany playing that big of a role and saying what's what
because of their economy. And by the way, you talk about NATO. They were involved in Libya. So what the hell are they? What's that got to do with with the
Italians ruled that before. Italians.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder too with the German with the how long this European Economic Union is going to last. Not only there are people in there who want to see more than economic union, they want to see a real union. I mean,
and
so
the nationalists. But you know what? You've been talking about it. Just imagine Germany is sort of, let's call it a dark, cold country. Greece and Italy, etc., is a warm country, Mediterranean. And they. Yeah, so we go to work. We take a 2-hour lunch break, and
what we have for supper tonight.
Yeah, right. And and the German, and part of it is the the national mentality and the weather
necessity.
To some extent.
Yeah, out of necessity.
Look at us. If we all went to Florida, we'd all be wearing shorts and and saying you all and so that's there is a difference. There really is a difference, and there's a difference in. The outlook, the Germans don't understand these 2-hour lunches, and
that makes you think of Burt Wolfe on PBS with his cooking shows. He relates to what the cuisine is by what the area, something for what the region was like.
Yeah.
I was reading William Manchester wrote a book about the Krupp, the arms of Krupp, the Krupp manufacturing firm. And one thing I was very impressed. He wrote about when the Americans were overrunning Germany, the western territories in Germany. The Germans. Those Germans who had no experience with Americans, and who had been fed this idea that Germany was the nation, of discipline, order, they were amazed that the Americans were just as much nose to the grindstone as the Germans were. They didn't realize. They'd been told all this propaganda that Americans were lazy, and they were finding out, no, the Americans are just as disciplined. They work just as hard. They're just as motivated as we thought we were. And they were very surprised to find this out.
My own late father, Clem Ryan, whose birthday would be the 23rd, born in 1914, he had said nowhere in the world works like we do. He's always had 3 shifts going, no matter what. He said Germany wasn't even in full production until way late in the war.
Yeah,
we have fewer holidays than any other country in the world. We have very
and fewer vacations.
Right.
The other thing the German soldiers said, they said, you know what? The Americans, we always were afraid of them because they were always advancing and they were quiet. So the English, the French, they're singing, they're yakking it up, not yakking it up, but they're noisy, and the Russians, of course, they knew what to expect from them. They said the Americans, you didn't know what they were doing, but they were out there. They knew they were coming towards you, and they were really. They learned to respect the American soldier.
We're such a hybrid people too. How do you characterize an American?
That's
The
right.
Nazis had told them that we were, because just what you're saying, that we were a racial
stupid gangsters, mongrel.
We were a mongrel nation. We were all gangsters.
Yeah.
On that happy note,
didn't have one language really.
Gangster, Chicago.
Gangster.
We got to wrap it up. I'm getting a signal.
You're getting a signal.
We're coming to that magic time, folks. Listen for us again. We're getting some more of these subjects. We just got warmed up today. Right, gang?
Right.
So for John Kushelko,
here's all
Ken
my
Little,
notes.
Ron Smolin.
Yeah, do it again. Yeah.
Ron Smolin.
Yeah.
And myself, Jack Ryan, and of course our producer, creator, John DeVita. So long from me to Chicago Historians.
And thank you, gentlemen, for a great job you did again today. We'll be back again on YouTube on Monday, December the 19th. So be sure you tune in to Meet the Chicago Historians. Thanks, everybody.